Awesome. Yeah, welcome everybody. There are some announcements. Yeah, the biggest thing happening is that there was a pre-release of the next version of the VS Code extension. So that is super exciting. It's a pre-release right now, but seriously adds support for so many things. This is a huge update, moving to our actual compiler output. Previously, we were hacking it together, so it took a very long time to get all that working. It's been months of work, but I think it closed like 13 issues at once or something, 15 maybe, something wild like that. So yeah, give it a try if you're using VS Code. Leave us some feedback in the dev tooling channel. We're going to keep improving that before we give it an official release. That's very exciting. I forgot to put it on the agenda here, but just wanted to say welcome to Mark. You will see him in the call. Yeah. Mark is a designer, has joined the Astro Technology company and the core team to help us level up our design game. So super excited to have him. Really, really excited for what comes next. Sweet. I did have doc stuff. Oh no. Let me open up the slides, Fuzzy. 1 second. So yeah, we've got a bunch going on in the Astro repo. Lots of merge pull requests this past week. Tons of issues closed. I think we're around 60 issues right now, which is super impressive. Huge thanks to Matthew and Bjorn, especially, really leading that effort. Yeah, we released a patch with some fixes, 1.68. There are server improvements. So I'm blanking on what exactly those were, but a bunch of fun stuff. Definitely lots of error improvements. That's what Erica has been working on mainly. And Mark is also jumping in and helping us with the UI on that. So that's exciting. Error codes. I love the GIF in this background. That's amazing. Error codes. We are basically adding an error code to like everything you can run into. So that's going to be super exciting. That will be joined by, a dedicated reference in the docs. And we'll have internal docs on like writing better error messages. So all of this is super exciting, going to help a lot as you're debugging. In my mind, I've always thought that the sign of a project maturing is really good error messages. Helping people once they're off the green path is super, super helpful. One thing you may not have known works is you can have a dynamic segment in your file-based routing. So there were some bugs with this, but we just ironed those out. So this has always been supported. Just a cool thing to remember. You can actually put multiple segments in the same file, but this is super handy. So that is fully supported now. Yeah, you just pass in your slug when you do get static paths. Or if you're using server-side rendering, you don't even need to worry about it. We had a few external contributions. I think
just the one.
Riensta, or M Riensta. I don't know. Thank you for your contributions. This definitely helped with our front matter typing. So that is very much appreciated. support squad. Fuzzy, you want to take this section?
You don't mind? Really, there's only one call out. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Right, awesome. There's only really one call out this week, simply and only because Happy Dev in the community has been literally weighing over above the Call of Duty the past couple of weeks, especially the past week. He has been helping everybody as much as he can. So yeah, just one special call out to thank you very much, bud. Yeah. Happy Dev was rocking it.
That is awesome. I love the reaction gifs always. We've got some docs updates as well. I can take these, or Sarah, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to.
Jump in and give you a little bit of a break. There's not much to report from docs. I mean, there's just always constant activity, and we're just trying to keep up with y'all. These are the first time seeing these slides too. So this is the one cool thing to announce. So Friday, we put a new issue up. This is a pinned issue, 2042. It'll be pretty easy to find. We last week received our first stats dump of search terms to the docs website. So now we know what people are searching. What we want to do is try and figure out whether they're actually getting good results and whether the docs are doing their job and leading them to proper places when they are searching for these things. So this is a slide, right? So we can't scroll on it. If one were to scroll down, oh, no, I guess not. We've got a list of like 20 some odd search terms there. And oh, wait, I have the link. I can post it in chat. There we go. So feel free to grab a search term, search it on the doc site, and you can see we've already had some people jump in and get started and then provide responses to like what they found, whether the docs are doing a good job, if somebody comes and is searching for that kind of thing. So that's our exciting community project at the moment, and we'd love it if you'd pick a term, search docs, and see what you think. There's some guidance in the initial message in that issue there. And that's all I got to report. Back to you, Nate.
Thank you so much. I think there's maybe one or two other things.
Just a
reminder that the Astro tutorial is out there. Super exciting. Definitely give us feedback. We're still collecting that. It's been very positive so far. And we're continuing to make improvements on that. So, and then this week there were 7 new contributors, which is so exciting. The docs team always does such a great job onboarding new folks. So, congrats on the contributors. Amazing. Cool. Now we have some other stuff to chat about. So I think the biggest thing that has been floating around is this exciting content schemas RFC. If you haven't seen this video, I would definitely give it a watch. It's quite long, so we don't have to do that now. But it's really exciting. The gist of it is kind of there are 2 parts, but it's a new way to interact with content in your Astro file. Basically gives you strongly typed front matter and fixes some issues with our current setup. So this is actually a 2-part RFC. Ben, is one better to start with?
Yeah, the first one's definitely better. And I've already been looking through the comments that have been coming through. Thank you to anyone who's been giving feedback asynchronously. We did make some changes to naming throughout this RFC, but not anything else. And I also moved it from draft to official PR because I did want to discuss it in a more formal setting today, actually going through all the wording and deciding if we like this feature. But yeah, as you mentioned, the video is good. If you don't mind, I can just start walking through this with you screen sharing.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So to start, I immediately call out, like, there is a complementary proposal that's a lot smaller. It's not necessary to read that one to understand this one. That's just kind of an addendum that you can go read about to render content. But here are all of the major pieces and glossary of terms that you would need to know. It's short. It's not as scary as it sounds. The main thing to know is that we're introducing the ideas of schemas, collections, and entries. So a collection is a collection or group of blog posts or just general posts written in Markdown and MDX. And a schema is the shape of all the things in those collections. So if you have a bunch of Markdown files and all of them need to have a title and description, the collection will be all those posts and the schema will be title, description, type string. And entry is just an entry in the collection, so an individual file. So yeah, that sets the stage, I guess. So the background, what I wanted to kick off with, front matter is kind of hard to use right now. You can, of course, glob for a set of entries. That is our sanctioned way to get content today. And you can do that to get any number of really any file type, but mainly Markdown and MDX. And then you can typecast that to the front matter that you're expecting to come out of those posts. So if you know you put title and description, you can say, hey, TypeScript, there's a title and description. Don't worry about this. But of course, you're telling the compiler, don't worry about this, when maybe it should. For example, maybe you forgot a title on a new post that you just wrote, and you had a little too uppercase collar because you're like, oh, I know this is going to be a string. I just wrote the type. And you have to go down this debugging rabbit hole of, where did I call that function? Oh, right, it's on the landing page. Maybe it was the title property. But it's post missing a title. Maybe I should console log and scroll through to find it. Oh, it's post 1149. You know that debugging hole. You don't really know where the problem happened. You just know a problem happened, and you would rather go to the root of the problem. So what I'm presenting is some way to give you really, really rich error messages to say, if you tried to call two uppercase, you don't even get the error in the code. You're getting an error as you're authoring the post. And you immediately see, okay, I just wrote a new post. Title's a required field. I can't use it in my application until that title is there, or I mark it as optional. So that's really the big point of schemas, is to keep things safe and to keep things predictable. And you don't have to typecast anymore because it's just known what it is when you define a schema. And we'll get into what a schema looks like in a bit. It's fairly simple. So the second thing I want to call out, importing globs of content can be slow at scale. If you're creating a landing page, for example, and you don't even need to render the post, you're just trying to get a list of titles and links to link out to all the other posts. Common for footers, common for side navigation, for example. If you're globbing in all of those places, Veed is going to say, all right, I'm going to go compile all these MDX files to actual MDX, and then when I'm done globbing, then I'll put it on the page. Which some people in the audience might have worked with a huge directory of MDX files and noticed, man, this gets slow in the dev server especially. And I would like a way that can speed that up, where if I'm just importing the titles and links, you shouldn't be running it through the MDX compiler. You should just give me the title and links. That's it. And that is an avenue that this helps you with. So that was weirdly worded. But the goals, you should word it better. Make landing and index pages easy to create and easy to debug with those error messages I mentioned earlier. Standardizing how to type check your front matter at the framework level. You're not doing it. Astro's helping you do it because it's a very common use case. And of course, providing those valuable error messages to help you debug everything. The only thing to call out here that's out of scope is this is just Markdown and MDX that we're focusing on here, although we are trying to use very generic terms like collections so that we set ourselves up to support buckets of YAML, buckets of JSON, image assets, maybe. Any data types that you might have used in 11D, for example, they have a data directory. Imagine if you could type check your YAML and JSON in Astro and just use it that way. So that's what we're thinking about in the future. Right now, we're focused on content. So you can see here, this is how you would set it up. This is a rough example, and we're going to go through all the details in a bit. There's a lot of them, but we'll speed through the second part of this. Oh, sorry, can you scroll up a little bit? Just want to explain that directory there. So this is how you would set up a collection of stuff or a bucket. Yeah, thanks in the chat, Sarah. Source content is now a reserved folder in Astro. It's a special folder. And inside of this, you put each collection of items that you want to pair together. So here I have a blog about space, Enterprise, Columbia Endeavor, all NASA shuttles, and a schema file, which says the shape that all of those markdown files should have. So you can see here, you can use get collection in order to get that collection of posts, and you can use get entry to get an individual post out of that folder. So here you can get the collection of blog entries with get collection. You can put a little filter on there if you don't want to, put parentheses around a weight and use .filter. We made it just a little bit more streamlined here if you wanted to filter by draft in the front matter, for example. And you can use get entry if you know the exact post that you want. And you can see there in the markup that you can use it the same way you would a glob result. You get all your post, you map over the post. You can access front matter properties on .data. Again, this is very generic terms, so we could support any file type. But .data in order to get the title, maybe a slug that you wrote yourself, publish date parts to a date string, all sorts of things that you would get when you're globbing for something. And this is where the magic is happening. So in that blog folder, we had a schema file that said everything in blog is going to have this shape of front matter. And you can see here we're using Zod, a very fancy library that will type check things at runtime and give you a ton of extra utilities that TypeScript doesn't even have. We just scratched the surface of those here. But one thing that you can do is transform one data type to another so that when you import it, it just is the data type that you want. So here I'm getting the publish date, and I'm saying just turn that into a date object so that if it fails to parse it a date, I can know that the second I try to use it. I don't have to call new date on every post and then discover, oh, post 1000 had a wrong date. It was malformed. One of the many things that Zod can help you with. Simple example here. And Zod's a third-party library, by the way. We'll get into how we want to expose that in the future, but that's what we're relying on. So yeah, detailed usage. We'll go through this a little bit quicker. But first off, source content is like the new sanctioned directory in your project. It's reserved by Astro. You can't use it for your own purposes. But it'll be relative to your source directory. So whatever you have configured there, it'll work. Then you have the Astro cache directory. That's where all this stuff is coming from. You might have caught while we're going through this. It's .astro, not Astro. And that's because we need to generate some types on the fly. There is actually some code generation going on in order to give you all the type checking in your editor, which you can watch the video to see in action. But you can see here it's coming from a special folder that you will put into your git ignore. We'll do that for you, ideally, especially with Astro 2.0. And we're comparing this to kind of like the .for-cell folder you get for deployments or the .vs code section you get for config. .astro is just another special generated folder that you can get some helpers from, get collection and get entry. Yeah. So next section, creating a collection. You make a folder and you're done. That is a collection. So everything inside of source content needs to be in a nested collection folder because that's what you will use to get collection later on in your app. So here you don't put stuff in the base directory. You can say like newsletters. Those have a certain shape, and here's all my newsletters. Blog, here's that. It has a certain shape as well. And you, sorry, might want to mute that. So also, you can see poking out there nested directories. So this is basically just calling out, yeah, you can put directories inside of this. Don't worry about it. So if you wanted to sort of organize your collections yourself, like if you're trying to create a docs collection and internationalize all of those docs, but you want them to all have the same schema, you can say, all right, I'll make a nested EN folder, nested ES folder, whatever I want to do. And you'll be able to fetch those the same way you would a base level entry. So directories are just up to you, but collections are always one level deep. The last thing is about schemas. I kind of ran through this already, but you make the schema file, you export a schema variable, and that's going to specify everything that you're allowed to use. So I'm using object here to say what my front matter should look like, and I also called out some more benefits I didn't even mention, like Zod can give you a regex for email, a regex for URL, so you can say, I want to put the author's email in the front matter, and I can parse it with .email to make sure it's properly formatted before I try to use it and end up with a bad experience. And Zod's documentation sums this up a lot. You can get very fancy with Zod, but I think most people will stick with like surface level stuff, strings, booleans, numbers, etc. And then fetching content, we use those utilities that we talked about earlier. This section doesn't expand on the example too much. It's the same thing again, just with a little more words. get collection, get entry. That's how you get anything out of these folders. And all of the results will be type checked. There's no any anymore. And the return type is going to be that. So actually scroll down. I wrote it out a little bit nicer. So it'll take that chunk, and any result that comes out of get collection or get entry is going to look like this. A little tab indexing problem there. But you can see data is going to be the front matter. You can see image was optional, tags is an array. And then you have an ID and a slug that is computed for you. This makes get static paths so much easier. I don't know if anyone's tried to use get static paths with file names, but it is annoying. You have to do a bunch of regexing to figure out what is a slug that comes off this file name, or you have to write them by hand. But here you can see we compute those for you, and we'll also give you the types so that while you're editing, you immediately know what the ID and slug are. They're not generic strings. So that's everything, really. And body is just the raw markdown body. Still considering removing that from this RFC, but I didn't. But you will use render content to actually use it on the page, which is the other RFC that we don't have to get too much into. Nested directories, those work like that. So you can see there, if you have a nested directory, you'll get slashes in the ID and slug. So if you wanted to use get static paths for multiple directories deep, it'll work just as well. Like you can see here, I already have routes for EN getting started, ES getting started, etc. And I can wire that up pretty easily. With the source pages section, which is up next here. Oh boy, GitHub, eight space tabs. But yeah, you can see there, that is my directory. That's how I have it set up. And if I wanted to use get static paths, I could just call it, get the collection of docs, and I can map all of the slugs to a route on my website. You don't have to set up slugs yourself. You can write them by hand and map them here. You have that freedom. But if you want to use the slug we give you and just make them routes on your site, it's literally 4 lines of code to get going. So that's pretty exciting. And you can render the content onto the page using render content, which is, it's a big proposal, but it's a very simple use case in order to actually use the page itself. Excuse me. So yeah, detailed design is not as interesting to users. If you are a developer that's interested in details, here's where we actually talk about how this thing's implemented. And you can see there we generate some files inside of the .astro folder to give you metadata. This is actually changing the more that we've worked with it. There's now only 2 files that are generated, but here it's pretty much similar, where we generate a map of all of the entries in your project so we can give you type checking, and also those utilities coming out of that index file so you can get collection and get entry. And the manifest is actually where all those types get generated. Some of that manifest has been super simplified thanks to a suggestion from Blue, who is on the Vite team. So I'm excited to update that appendix a little bit now that it's working. Just got it working an hour ago. So that's cool. But yeah, it should speed things up by separating from the Vite pipeline a little bit. And you can import get collection, get entry from the Astro folder, because they're all pulling from generated types. So the only drawbacks to note, and I'm sure there's others people can think of, but mainly Zod is a learning curve. All right, it's not TypeScript. It's a new thing. It's more powerful and it's more simple than if you have seen the JSON-based schemas that CMSs and Content Layer, if you've seen that project, they're using a very custom syntax in order to do this sort of thing. But Zod is an out-of-the-box third-party library where if you already know Zod, then you can just bring all that knowledge here. And otherwise, we can just move at the pace that they're able to go. So you're not restricted to reading Astro docs for a ton of properties. You can just go to Zod, get going. So yeah, I called out some alternatives here about how, Zod is cool, but what if we also allowed you to export a TypeScript interface if you're into that sort of thing? We want to have one happy path for the RFC, so we don't want to ship 2 solutions to the problem until there's really a user need. So we're going to be shipping Zod because it's the more powerful version of this idea. And if enough people want TypeScript interfaces, which have less capabilities, we can ship that as well. So just calling that out as an alternative. And also saying maybe Zod comes from the .astro folder instead of you having to install Zod into your project. That seems like something worth doing to make Zod feel a little bit more friendly, a little bit more built in. But right now you installed the package in order to use this. Also, collections and globs. Yeah, collections are a folder. And some people like wildcards. They don't want structured collections. They don't want us to tell you where to put your files. They want to have a fat glob pattern and put their files wherever they want. And this would require you to wire up schemas yourself. This would be different from the file-based routing that we have today. It's kind of mirroring how file-based routing works. So we didn't go with this solution. But again, if enough people are in the comments talking about, I love globs, bring back globs, then we can talk about that. But of course, you're still free to use AstroGlob today. This isn't removing AstroGlob from the code base. It's only giving you a nice type-safe way to import content more predictably. And the last thing is about, I love globs. Okay, yeah. I thought you said time limit. I was seeing how long I've been talking. But yeah, last drawback here, virtual modules. We're importing from .astro. Maybe it would be cool to use like Astro content or introduce a new naming scheme for that. That feels more like a future concern, but some people, Fred, like the Astro prefix. So I'm calling it out here as like, if people prefer a virtual module, then we can, import it in this sort of way as well. But right now we're just importing from a directory to keep it simple. So yeah, adoption strategy. I mean, the plan for this huge proposal that I've just presented is releasing behind an experimental flag in the coming weeks, maybe by end of the year, in order to get some feedback before we go for a 2.0 release, which is still in the distance. Don't worry, people. We're not barreling towards a major release. We want to release this experimentally to get your feedback before shipping anything. And you will be able to use it that way. And we'll probably release some preview documentation as well. Shout out to the docs team. I presented some ideas here about how we could sort of shift around a preview of the docs in order to highlight source content best and give you a nice inroad to best practices. But of course, this will be an ongoing discussion about how to do that best. But yeah, expect documentation when this is experimental. Don't worry about that. What else? Unresolved questions.
Ben, just to ask, because I want to make sure this is what you're saying. So the only breaking change is that source content becomes a new reserved special place. So if you already have a source content directory today, you most likely need to move that or adopt this new system. That's the only breaking change expected.
Yes.
And then the other big change is that this would be a new blessed way to load content. So you wouldn't have to move to it, but we would be recommending that people start to think of their markdown collections as this new concept of a collection with schemas, transforming, validation, all that stuff.
Yep, exactly that.
Cool. Just checking.
Yep. Yeah, I should have mentioned what this actually is. But yeah, new folder and new way to get your markdown. So that's really it. I call out some questions that we've already kind of talked about. Is like, what does this mean for AstroGlob? What is the future? And also, do we like .astro as a cool directory? Do we want it to be configurable? But that's really it. So now I will open the floor, I suppose, for anyone that has questions, comments, concerns.
Hey Ben, this is Matthew. The .astro import specifier there, is that how is TypeScript able to how does it know that exports? How does that work?
As of right now, I wouldn't think that would work unless we explicitly created a declaration for it.
Exactly right? Yep. Right now, it is in your TS config, you would have to set up an alias to this folder because it's not living inside of node modules. And there's a couple avenues to addressing that. One can be the Astro CLI wiring that up for you, checking the base URL and making sure that it matches up correctly in order to inject that. Maybe that's a cool onboarding ramp. Another one is to explore type defs or updating the env.d.ts. If I understand that file correctly, we could set up an alias to the folder from there as well, but that's something that I'm just less familiar with, so I haven't touched it yet. But yeah, we'll need to set up an alias.
What's the future configurability of the collections feature?
What would you like to see configured?
The ability to basically, for example, being very strict about that source/content may not work for every single use case people may run into. So being able to configure that to a different folder if, for example, you need to have that source slash content there for whatever reason, sounds kind of not useful and convenient. The ability to configure the way it runs, like example schema. If you have your own schema library, you don't have to recreate it from scratch. You just use that, and maybe set up an integration for that. So you can actually set up a custom integration for your schema library, stuff like that.
I have thought about some people do use Yup, which it's kind of a precursor to Zod. It was around a lot earlier. And could be interesting to have different adapters for different schema definitions. I guess that's the term for it. Right now, it's definitely Zod only with this setup. So it would probably be some sort of wrapper function, a config option that we would release after the fact if there's enough need. So that could be interesting. Configuring the content folder itself, I also do kind of jive with, because we let you configure the root directory and the source directory. So why not also let you configure the content directory? I don't know if other core members have a thought on that. Right now, it is going to be relative to your configured source directory, so it'll at least respect that. But I'd personally be okay with a content directory config option. Unless we feel really strongly like content's got to be a brand. It's got to be the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Source content obviously is the focus now, but like I could see source collections making sense if you're getting a collection, right?
Yeah, it's funny you would say that. We have thought about renaming it to source collections because it might contain more than just Markdown and MDX.
Right.
But didn't do that for this RFC just yet. Might be a change that we make if other people like it.
Yeah, I think instead of saying like we know definitely, like I really like the idea of starting without the configuration, and then like 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, we like, okay, we know what this is going to be now. We know it's this like super configurable thing. Then I would say making it configurable makes sense. But yeah, Ben, what you just hinted at, we might want a data folder. I know Fuzzy's bringing back up the assets folder, which is something that a lot of people might remember from the old days. But we've talked about an images folder and a fonts. Like there's a whole different path where this is almost the start of like magic folders, that meaning it's documented. And there is something about that if they were all configurable would be really a bit of a nightmare. So I'm not saying that either one of those is the right path or the definite where we're going path, but I would not want to close the door on that before we know what it is for sure.
Yeah.
But what if you actually hit on a really, really good point? Configurable predefined folders. What if we created an adapter system that actually allows you to set up your own pre-configured folders for specific content types? That would allow like content collections to be their own thing, images to be their own thing, WASM files to be their own thing, and like so you can like, like a bigger. Maybe this is probably increases the scope of the RFC, but this is an like idea as a if this is successful, we take this further.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's always a double-edged sword of which way to go, and different projects have approached that differently. 11D is very well known for everything being configurable, including the data folder and any other magic directory they have. And Nuxt and Next, which are also comparable, are known for not letting you configure that stuff. Maybe Nuxt does today in Nuxt 3, but I know that they use a lot of magic folders that are predefined. And the main benefit is when you go in Astro project, you always know what content means. You always know what data means, for example. So if we don't let you configure it, it means everyone's projects feel the same way like everyone knows pages in Astro today. So that is why I think keeping that off of the RFC for now and seeing community response is a better choice, because following in either project's footsteps is an option.
Yeah, I would point out that like right now we have one magic folder, which is source pages, and everything else is just convention. So like I get the hesitancy to like embrace another magic folder since we've gone so long without it, but I do think the benefits here really outweigh like, I don't know, the concerns in my mind of like, oh no, more magic folders. But I think all the features we're getting for that are totally worth it in my mind.
one key question we need to have is the point of the collections to give you faster access to metadata, or to make it easier to access actual markdown to render? Depending on how we prioritize it, the body of the markdown can probably be like a sync away. Actually gets fetched and it's used.
Yep, that's what it is.
So that's what it is right now.
You are hinting at part 2 of the RFC. So, yeah, I can. Can you scroll down to just one example in this file that I think will clear up what the use case is? This is examples, proposal. There it is. So this is the thinking, where what you said is exactly right. The first proposal is prioritizing, I want to get some metadata and I want to make sure the shape is what I expect. And when I go to render that, I want to do it asynchronously, only do it at the edge of when I need it so that my builds can be performant until I need to render. So you would call render entry, where you would pass in the result of a collection call or an entry call, excuse me, and you would get a content component that you can use on the page. You can see here it's just a content component. There's no raw data or compiled data. We're keeping the scope very small, but this would be the way to asynchronously get it, as you mentioned.
Okay.
Oh yeah, metadata. Yeah, metadata equals front matter. Yeah, when I'm talking about that.
What's
Wait, so like
newsletter?
So headings and stuff wouldn't be part of it?
Define. Oh, like get headings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not on the result either. Nothing is on the result at the moment. But there's no reason not to pull some things in. I think get headings is something that we could cheaply do because of the way that we do it right now. But keeping out raw content and compiled content is probably going to be the way forward, just to keep the scope small. But yeah, I agree. Get headings could be added to this.
Ben, I'll just read out a question that Sarah said. Sarah, if that's all right. Sarah says, what's your thinking re providing a minimal schema, maybe even just a title or something to get started, versus these files needing to be created from scratch? And how does that fit in with Zod needing to be installed? Sarah says, I'm just thinking of a new user creating a new collection. Is there some way to have a minimal schema created, or is this intended to be very manual? Install Zod, make a new folder, create a new schema file.
The installing Zod step is something that I don't like. I agree it's not a great onboarding experience. So I'm planning to update the RFC to have Zod be a built-in, where it's on the .astro folder. It's not going to be in like Astro Core and making your SSR builds big. It's going to be something in that generated folder, so you can import Zod from us and use it straight away. So that should make things a little bit easier. But yeah, creating a schema file will be a manual step. So if you wanted to add a title, you say Z-string. And we've also talked about a CLI helper to give you some built-ins of just like create collection with like the blog schema or the newsletter schema. That's something Tony was playing with. If there's enough need or you think it would help onboarding, Sarah, maybe we can make CLI part of this release. Because I could see like Astro Create Collection, as Nate shared there, being a way to just whip one up and make the schema file for you so you can play with it.
Actually, another question we probably should have is, do people really need the complexity or the power Zod has as a schema? Because Zod is very powerful from my understanding, but like for the most part, people have been using TypeScript for a while now, and that's worked. So do people really need that much power? As like, at least for starting an RFC.
Yeah. I mean, the pulpit I've been sitting on is like, we want one right solution that scales as high as you want it to go. And introducing like a TypeScript version or a JSON version wouldn't scale as well, and it would probably be like a secondary option alongside the primary one. And as Nate highlighted there, even for tiny use cases like a publish date, which almost every blog post has, Zod gives you a type check that TypeScript fundamentally can't. Because you want to transform a string into a date. And there's no concept of transforming with TypeScript types. So that's why I like Zod a lot, even for the smallest use cases of like, this is URL and this is a date. It will help you. So I think sticking with that as the one solution is like the way to go. But I understand some little pushback that's coming up with z.string is more complex than TypeScript. So at least making Zod a built-in will help.
Ben, one thing I'll just throw out there is that like if to look at any comparable projects, Content Layer and what was the new one that just got released? Why am I blanking on this?
Tina CMS?
Yeah, anytime you... What's that?
But Tina CMS has...
and Payload. Yeah, Payload, Content Layer, and Tina, they all do this like JSON schema. A TypeScript type is not enough for the use cases I see it because it's just limited to type checking. So you just get a type. And even that I don't think is really fully easy. What this gives us is runtime checking. So that means nice warnings, nice transforms, optional messages if something goes wrong. These are all features that every other project like this has felt the need for, and I see the same need for us here. So it's not just Zod versus something really lightweight. It's Zod versus us rolling our own. And that's something that would really worry me. Especially seeing prior art here, it's something that you then have to document, implement, fix bugs. There's a lot of value on just leaning on something that's at its core very simple here. Looking at the example that's open here, z.string is not a tough API to learn, but it still has all the power of the advanced use case when you need it.
I feel like it opens a question for me about like editor tooling. Like, is this only going to be at runtime or potentially integrated into the editor? Like, we have full control over that. So I wonder if Zod makes it more difficult to do that. Probably not. Because you get a fully type-checked object back from this, so you could do it.
Because like the schema does the schema.ts file do anything else? Because from what I can see here, like the schema, like actually let me rephrase the question. The way Zod would work in the collections API, how exactly does that sort of work? Like how is Zod going to be called to parse the schema?
It's file-based. I call it file-based routing for collections, but it's internal code that will look at your collection directory. It will see the schema file. It will go ahead and import the Zod schema from that file, and it'll run all of your collection entries through that schema for you. And then it will actually output a TypeScript object in that .astro folder so that editor tooling knows all of the types. So we're generating all these types when you run your project for the first time so that VS Code can catch up and can get all the information it needs. So Zod's not going to be like something your editor has to support. It's just outputting TypeScript when we run it. And that's pretty much it. The only magic is because of the file name, Astro knows to import it and run all of your Markdown files through it before you try to import.
The reason why I asked is, would it be possible to like set up another export that allows you to like customize the schema? Another export that allows you to like we can import that extra whatever it would be called, like schema render or schema generator, whatever, and then I don't know, use that to generate types. I guess that's the main reason I asked.
Okay, one thing you might be missing is that you get a type out of that schema. So the cool thing about Zod is it's actually exporting the type, typing the schema. So you have access. You don't need to define a manual type. Unless there's some use case you're expecting around needing to change it. But what it gives you is taking all those transforms, validations, everything that comes out of that, you actually get an exported type as well as the actual parser validator.
Well, what I'm discussing is more of the implementation details. So how we actually implement this, the way the schema is parsed. So instead of having it built in, well, technically have it built in, but it's possible for you to actually export, it's possible to have schema.ts file support an extra export. I can basically tell you how to deal with the schema.
Yeah, I mean, it's hypothetical what you would do there, but I have thought about like loaders with like being able to load different file types you'd export from the schema file. You mentioned supporting other parsers like Yup. That could be a thing that you can do in schema to say, parser, use this, And then schema is this. And then instead of Astro running Zod internally, it runs the thing you gave us internally. I see both of those as future explorations, but I agree, like, because we're owning the schema file, we could have all kinds of named exports to make this thing customizable.
Okay.
Is the schema required? Do you have to have a schema? Can you just not have one?
You can not have one and it'll be type any.
Okay.
So if you just want to store stuff and fetch them, you can do that.
I'm thinking about. I'm worried about driving away. We have a big contingent of users who are like not heavy JavaScript developers, who maybe are more HTML and CSS developers, more designers. Like we have like this is something we appeal to those people a lot, and I want to make sure we don't make their experience. I want to drive them away because we become too dependent on you being a TypeScript dev. I think that applies to not just Zod. I think TypeScript as well might be too much for a certain type of user. So I really want to make sure we consider that and make sure we have as good of an experience as possible for those users.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for those users, I see it as don't provide a schema and it'll be type any, so it's almost like glob. There's not much difference. And if you want a schema, our CLI can give you some ready-made helpers in order to do it. The only small argument is that TypeScript is more friendly to those kinds of people, but I'm not sure how much more friendly it is because it is still JavaScript. It's a flavor of JavaScript. So I don't know if Zod is that much harder. But worst case, you don't provide one or we do CLI.
I don't know which one.
Some presets of common data types.
Yeah.
Tony, I know, is very excited about that.
Generate a schema for them based on their front matter. Like that's probably possible.
Yeah, that gets tricky just with like Markdown. It's so hard to look at it and know is something a string or actually supposed to be a date. It gets into like really nasty regexes to try and figure that out.
I feel like it's just going to be a long road of us building custom parsers. That's why I avoided it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would absolutely push that off as a future thing and picking one as the kind of blessed one. Again, I'm thinking more of Sarah than anyone, like documenting this as the right way, and then obviously not closing the door to a different customization down the road.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're talking about. I'm just talking about someone has a markdown file. There is front matter there, which is YAML, using a YAML parser and providing those types, not doing any custom parsing.
So you mean inferring?
Yeah, inferring. Yeah, I'm thinking about like the class of user who is not a TypeScript dev. We have a lot of these people in our community.
Right. Yeah, we can infer those, I think, to what string, Boolean, or number, I think is what Markdown syntax supports, which I think gets you part of the way there. That would make sure you don't have like typos just in the front matter property names and that stuff.
Yeah. Then we'd have to kind of infer like, 60% of these have title, description, and published date, so that's the type. And the rest might be incorrect. I don't know. It just gets funny, but it could be done.
I feel like this is talking about that same thing of like an Astro add collection kind of command where I don't think this would be a long-running feature that you're describing, Matthew. More of like, okay, I put 1,000 markdown files in this collection like you told me, and I'm getting 0 TypeScript validation or any validation, which is fine. It's the same world I was in before this feature, but okay, now I want validation. And the way to do that is to add a schema TS, use Zod, and export, or I could run some command that would like auto-generate it for me. And then I would go and like modify it. Matthew, I'm not trying to like put words in your mouth, but I see this more as like, how could I infer this as a kind of first user feature versus like long running? Yeah, like what if there's 10 different titles that I found or a typo, or how do I? Yeah, I see that more as a one-off parsing step. And every time I start this up, I'd be parsing 1,000 different files just to generate a.
Yeah. That's no, I do think about it as a long-term thing because I'm thinking about like a class of user who is just intimidated by this code and it does not want to write it. Like, what is the solution? Like, I don't want people to be like, I don't want to learn Zod, therefore Astro's not for me. Like, how do we?
Yeah,
do
Zod can actually be very intimidating.
Because I think we have them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also like one way of interacting with content. I don't think there's a proposal here to like get rid of markdown files as pages or anything like that. Like, I think
probably we're gonna document this as the preferred way, right?
We are.
Right.
I see what you mean, Matthew, about in that solution, everything would be optional probably. Where like if you add a title to one of the posts, it becomes a type, but it's null checked. But we could, instead of it being type any, without you writing a schema at all, we could look at the front matter and all of these posts. We can see that some of them have a title so that we can add it to the schema and say some of these have a title. So that way you don't get type any, you get something. But if you want anything to be not optional, or you want to add any of the transforms that we're showing here, you make a schema file. There could be some inference. I kind of like that.
Ben, it's funny. I almost like disagree with the framing of the RSC, and I'll just kind of mimic. I mean, Sarah, I think, sees more new users than any of us, and I'll just read her comment out. There's one good example in Docs. Many of us who aren't even TS users are good pattern matchers. I can onboard people in Docs just fine. That as soon as they get to me before they get frustrated. So obviously a trade-off here, but I think your RSC kind of presents Zod as the complicated choice, and I actually would push back. Like, this is probably the easiest thing to read that I've seen in this example that's open here versus any of the custom JSON. Again, you can scroll up in the comments for what you did, where it's like, okay, I need to know this custom JSON format. Like z.string, I can't think of anything easier than that. So I guess I push back against the framing that this is the complicated choice that we're making a trade-off around. This is my favorite choice. And sure, I'm a TypeScript author, but I'm saying that as someone imagining a first-time user reading this. It reads almost like English. This is a string. This is an optional string. This is an array of strings. I can't think of anything better here. So I would just say that.
The thing is,
I don't agree. I like z like the z.string is inside of the array function call. Like I could. There's nothing that tells me that that's the way it is, other than just like knowing the library.
Not like the problem with it's not actually a problem. Is just it seems more complicated than it actually is, and that
any as the default might be okay for that class of user. I just want to make sure we're thinking about them.
Yeah. And I see this as the optional. Like, I want to add parsing, and then you're choosing between all the different ways you might add that. I agree that having a default where this doesn't exist at all, to me, makes a lot of sense.
I do want to take one step back for a second. The example that came up about like the onboarding experience, if you drop like 1,000 markdown files into source content blog, and then you want to make schemas, that given that every markdown file in that folder has to use the same schema, that could make for like a really challenging onboard. Like if some of your markdown files have published date as a date and some it's just like actually used in a different way, like it's just true false or something. Or any kind of naming collisions, if you're just migrating over markdown files, is that a concern here for onboarding?
Sorry, was that for me, Tony?
Oh, for anyone, Ben, Fred, Matthew, anybody that's got ideas on just like how that.
I wouldn't. I would say the category of user I'm talking about. I'm not thinking of like new users. They might have used Astro already. They're just not JavaScript devs, and they're never going to be JavaScript devs. They don't want to be JavaScript devs. It's not one of the things that appeals to Astro to people is it's how close it is to HTML and that sort of thing.
Right. I guess I was just thinking through the scenario of like, I have 2 markdown files, and the front matter I put in them is actually blocked on how I use it because they have to follow the same schema. That might be a weird case. Like it might not be something that really is an issue. But just
Chris raised it as well.
Okay.
And of course the solution is like, you make another collection and you divide them out. And I feel like the onboarding there would be putting down all the front matter properties that they have, making them type any if they are different for some posts, making them optional if they're in some posts and not others. And then when you actually figure out these posts have this schema and these posts have this schema, then you separate them out into 2 collections, and you can make your more strict files that way. So I guess that would be some migration story of like, use type any for each front matter property until you know what you're working with. Because I agree, it could be frustrating if you got different stuff wired up. Just a consequence of how we did it.
I know we have 1 minute left. I just kind of wanted to throw a kind of different topic out there, comment out there. Fairly quick one, because it's not at all like blocking discussion here. It's just an idea to throw out around the alias question. Ben, you mentioned that one caveat of this is that the user needs to go and add their .astro alias themselves. And we kind of have some stuff around that, but it's, I don't know if you've explored how much that will feel, but like the idea of that is definitely interesting. I'd love to see that in practice before I left too much of a comment. One thing that we've talked about before is the idea of having the tilde slash, I'll just write it out and comment so everyone knows, like having this be an alias to your source directory. It's something that some other like SvelteKit does this. It's something that a lot of our users are already doing. And one thing that could allow for is that then we would get automatically the idea of an import from this. Like this would be supported automatically if we had the tilde alias in all projects. I know we've talked about where the .astro folder lives, and I think I've probably been the biggest proponent of not in the source directory, having it in the top level directory. But if this was a way to solve the alias needed for this one use case problem, that could be worth exploring.
How would that work exactly?
I'm not sure. It's just something I know we've talked about wanting to solve separate from this proposal. So I see it as a 2 birds, 1 stone if we wanted to solve it as a solution to this, and also as a way to get that for free.
It'd be nice if we could generate types so that you didn't have to do that, because I'm thinking about like case of you don't use npm init astro to create your project. You just create the folders. You're not going to necessarily, you're going to have to set up a lot of extra stuff you're not currently having to set up. Whereas if we're already generating the folder, I would think you'd be able to generate the DTS file as well.
Yeah, I'm just not enough of a TypeScript wizard to have figured it out. Right now I'm doing like setting up base URL in the tsconfig, but I know there's some other way to do it. I'm sure there is. I agree it can be generated.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a wizard either.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for the amazing discussion. We're definitely going to continue this. Just wanted to give people their time back. So I know we've gone a bit over. I apologize, but
real quick though, I think I know Ben's not looking for approval here, but the idea is that does Ben have everything? I guess it's a question for you. Ben, do you have everything you need to go forward and continue to experiment, get a branch out, get a draft PR out? Basically want to make sure that if we're collecting like, I am blocking on this kind of feedback, it gets to Ben sooner rather than later. Because I know, Ben, you're trying to get a preview of this out to kind of get the nitty gritty of it all figured out.
Yep. I haven't heard anything today that would block putting out a preview. But I have definitely heard like on-ramps to better onboarding, especially around like generating schemas for you or making schemas easier to create. Taking those thoughts to heart, and I would like to work on those before we get it behind an experimental branch. But yeah, I at least have enough to go off and keep going. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
And of course, leave
Sorry,
comments on the thing.
I'm hijacking this meeting for all my own personal things, Nate. I'm sorry. Ben, where's the best place to give you feedback if you're looking for more to follow up on these conversations? Yep. Where's the right place to go?
I was literally talking over you that. If you go here, well, actually, if you hit the back button, there's a link we can share in the chat. But there's been an ongoing thread here, and you can leave comments both for content schemas and the render content proposal. We didn't talk about render content much, but if you have thoughts on that, also put them in this thread.
Awesome.
Sweet. Thanks so much. This was a really great conversation. Definitely, if you're interested, get involved. Leave some comments. we would love to hear from you. So cool. With that, I will let everybody go. We will see you next week, but definitely see you online before then.